Probably there's an awful lot when we start considering the whole scope of the ageless wisdom. It goes from the creation of the cosmos to the creation of the individual to the creation of the smallest particle in nature. So for us, it always seems to be much easier to focus on what's going on inside of us. And that's an awful lot to get a handle on by itself. So we find that really in terms of the way that we approach it, probably the good place to begin for many of us is in trying to understand how it is that we're composed, what it is that drives us, what are the forces that react and that are moving through us. And that's something that makes this whole journey, it makes it doable because it's something that is so close to us.
The human being is essentially spirit. That spirit then has to take on specialized functions. It needs to have aspects of its particular causal path, of the things that it needs to go through in its evolutionary chain, and the things that have karmically been put into motion through its activities. That becomes, for example, what we think of as the causal body. Then we have the aspect of the activities of the intellect and the mind. That has to have its own vehicle or sheath that the spirit can activate and work through, which becomes the mental body. Same thing for our emotional function and our life energy function, all the way down to the crystallization of the physical body. So all of these different subtle bodies are the sheaths through which the spirit works to be able to manifest for us currently on the physical plane. But we can also manifest on higher planes once the sheaths of the lower planes are gone away. We can manifest without a physical body and still be operating through the sheaths of the etheric life body, the astral body, etc. Now the term astral body needs to be defined as in different Western traditions, they may use the term astral to mean both the mental and emotional functions together. And in some parts of the Western tradition, they use the astral to mean only the emotional, and they identify the mental as a separate body. So it's always a matter of understanding the terminology and how it's being used by a particular tradition. Different levels of the subtle body can be very deeply intertwined with one another. An example of this would be that what we experience within the etheric life body is the feeling that we have when we say if we are feeling good or bad, if I'm feeling healthy or ill. But we also express feelings in the emotional body. So if you ask someone how they're feeling, they may say, I feel sick, or they may say, I feel sad or happy. So the feelings of the emotional body are deeply linked to the feelings of the etheric life body. The same thing is true for the connection between the emotional body and the mental body. If the mental body is positive or negative in its orientation, that will impact the emotional body and vice versa. That becomes one of the reasons why the emotional and the mental are sometimes presented separately and sometimes presented in a unified form as kama manas or as the astral or other terms used in various traditions.
So what we're really talking about here is the human constitution. What is the nature of our inner lives? So always when we think about the planes of consciousness, we can make direct correlations to dimensions of that constitution of a human being as well. The journey of evolution is all about the soul, the causal body, moving from one incarnation to the next, and there's a whole physics around how does that work, and how does the soul move from one incarnation to the next, and how does the personality form each incarnation. Now, that leads me to a little bit of an overview of understanding the constitution of the causal body itself. Now, the causal body is often talked about as if it were a lotus. You know, some of the symbolism of Hinduism is used here, where the soul is considered a lotus with many petals. And there's the petals represent types of wisdom that are to be developed within the causal body. There's said to be something called the jewel in the lotus. The jewel represents, in a way, that represents that spark of life at the beginning of it all, the monad. And then there's something else that is often not thought about. It's called the permanent atoms. There are said to be 3 permanent atoms that are stored, you might say, in the antechamber of the causal body. These permanent atoms serve a very interesting function. When the soul incarnates, what's happening really? Well, the soul, the soul is incarnating, but it's not the whole soul that incarnates. It's only a portion of it. What happens is there's something called the sutratma. Now, the sutratma is the sort of the life thread. It's a life thread that descends from the causal body at the time of incarnation into the lower mental plane, the emotional plane, and the etheric physical plane. Now, that sutratma is said to have attached to it 3 permanent atoms. One of them is a mental permanent atom, which is often called the mental unit. A second one is the emotional permanent atom, and the third is the etheric physical permanent atom. What happens is when that sutratma descends into those lower planes, those permanent atoms send out a note, a quality, a set of vibrations into the plane they correspond to. So, for instance, let us use the emotional permanent atom as an example. When incarnation is happening, that permanent atom is transmitting vibration into the emotional plane. And that emotional plane, the substance of the emotional plane, and remember the substance is hierarchical from low to high as well, substance will be attracted to that permanent atom like moths to a flame, and it will build a sheath that eventually becomes the emotional body of the personality. The same is true above with the mental plane. That permanent atom, the so-called mental unit, will attract substance to create a mental body, and finally we have the bottom point, which is the etheric physical, which that will set up and draw substance that will build the etheric body, which becomes the scaffolding for the dense physical. And so that represents the process by which the personality is reconstructed. Now, what's interesting about that is that that's how karma is also transmitted. And that's where the distortions of the personality, it's how they move from one incarnation to the next. Because some of those vibrations that are stored in these permanent atoms, some of them are real lofty, and they tend to attract lofty substance from the plane to build the instrument. Some of them are more base, and some of them have dissonance that has correspondence to karma that was dissonant, that was created in previous lives. And that vibration is also being emitted by the permanent atom, drawing the lower substance from the plane to build that attribute into the instrument itself. So not only do these permanent atoms define just the process of incarnation to build a new personality, but it also defines through their nature the movement of karma from one incarnation to the next to set up the adjustments necessary to make that which is dissonant now harmonic. So as you can see by what I'm saying, this is the mechanism that is used to help life learn the lessons that it needs to learn, adjust dissonant patterns so that it becomes harmonic. When a person finally gets to the point of full enlightenment, it means that there are no more etchings on those permanent atoms that lead to dissonant lower substance attraction for incarnation to take place. And when that occurs, you are literally free from the necessity of incarnation again. So this is the underlying physics of how evolution works and how the personality is gradually transformed, and paralleling that is incremental, increased capacity of the soul to utilize that personality as an outer agent on its behalf.
The entry of the soul into incarnation is a purposeful matter, highly planned, and it may take a number of years for the soul on the higher mental plane to put forth an extension of itself through the lower planes and finally fasten itself to a sperm and ovum that create the growing physical human being. As it descends, it appropriates the mental body from a past incarnation, the astral body from a past incarnation, or all past incarnations really, and then the etheric body of vital electricity. It appropriates the seed of each one of those bodies. Before it descends, doing all that, we, as the soul, with the help of what is called the angel of the presence, which is part of this great solar angel which is in our soul body, we sound forth a note. We sound forth the note of our egoic lotus, of our causal body. That note sounds and we assess. Where is fullness lacking? What is overemphasized? What is underemphasized? What is needed to create the next step? And then we begin, as we descend into the lower 18 subplanes, to choose matter according to the ray that will be needed to demonstrate in the coming incarnation. So the pre-birth process is not just 9 months. It can be a long time. And some of them, maybe even 13 years. Some astrologers have tried to work this out. Well, that's another subject. But, you know, even a number of years can be involved in what is called the appropriation of the inner vehicles. And then, when biological parents provide the opportunity for an anchorage, the etheric body draws from the genetic pool that they have provided those factors, those elements, those constituents which are appropriate for the design of the incarnation as conceived by the soul nature before the whole process began. And this is repeated always, and the note is always sounded. New astrological and rheological factors, energies and forces are appropriated according to the design of the coming incarnation. Okay, and then around the etheric body is built, drawing upon the nutrients of the mother, the dense physical body of the child, which is then born. Then comes the unfoldment of these different vehicles and their expression through the dense physical body. Maybe the first thing to develop is the vital nature, the bioelectric field, taking control of the dense physical vehicle. You know, in the beginning, one can be a little bit awkward and one doesn't necessarily have full control of one's physical mechanism. This takes place, it is said, during the first 7 years of life. Cycles of 7 and cycles of 10 are offered. Cycles of 7 are significant. Cycles of 10 are suggested for study by the Tibetan. The appropriation of the emotional vehicle operates between the years 7 and 14. That's probably quite arbitrary because it depends on how advanced the soul development is. Different actual number of years can be involved in this appropriation by the personal consciousness of these vehicles. But suffice it to say, we go through quite a physical, etheric stage, then an emotional stage, and then from the years 14 to 21, following the cycles of 7, we go through the appropriation of the mental vehicle, and we often discover that we can think and that our mind is properly trained. That's why in certain methods of education, it is inappropriate to start training the mind per se too early. We have to feed the development of the lower vehicles first so they form a good support for the development of the mind. Then, if we follow the 7-year cycle, from the year 21 to 28, we have the development of the integrating personality. We put mind, emotions, and physicality together, and we begin to direct those things towards some kind of achievement in the outer world. This is called the first stage of personality integration. Some people, depending on their development, may never even become integrated personalities. But some of you who study astrology know there is such a thing as a Saturn return. And that Saturn return after about 28.5 years, 29 years, gives us the signal that our personality as a personality, mind, emotions, and body, is being integrated into one personal, effective, thinking, self-directed whole, according to the ray, okay? And there are many different, 7 rays, 7 types, etc. From the years 28 to 35, following the system of sevens, we take another step if we're up to it. A lot of people don't, and they're just not at that point yet. The petals of their egoic lotus have not sufficiently opened so that they can step into the next phase, which is the soul phase. But by the time we are 35 years old, we have gone through cycle number 5, and contact with our inner higher self that started the whole incarnational impulse can be achieved. And we can, according to the degree of our past life accomplishment, begin to become more and more the soul-infused personality. And it can go on from there to the year 42 and the important year 49, when we're supposed to be in the right place doing the right thing at the right time. It's a great moment of consolidation, concretization, and relative perfection during the 49th year. So everything is proceeding through sequential development. But on a case-by-case basis, the human being may be less developed or more developed internally, and the cycles can have variability. I mean, there will be some great souls, they say of Yogananda, that he was born, he sort of sat up, said a few things in Sanskrit, and lapsed back into babyhood. He had already this appropriation of the vehicles. He was an advanced soul. Others may have very little reincarnational experience, and they will not even get to the level of real mental development, let alone personality development. So there are many individual differences, but if we lay things out in the cycles of sevens and also perhaps in the cycles of tens, we can get the generic cycles through which a human being will pass in the reappropriation of the inner vehicles for expression, the reappropriation of those vehicles that he appropriated on the way into incarnation.
With the structure of our subtle bodies, the geometry of our spirit, there are certain absolutely fundamental structures in the energy body. Now, these are known by a variety of names. There is a form of energetic pillar around the human energy body that was known as the column of glory in the ancient Persian Manichaean tradition, and still referred to that by that name in the Coptic Christian tradition today. It's known by many names in various traditions. It's also related to the concept of the Antakarana. The essence of the formation of the geometry of the human energy body is that it has a primary axis that connects heaven and earth together. That primary axis goes from high above the crown, straight down through the midline of the body, from the crown to the perineum, and then out the base of the trunk and down into the earth. That's the primary axis. You see it being formed as the first axis within the developing fetus in the womb, and the creation of the neural tube in the developing fetus. So this primary axis, this connecting line between heaven and earth, is the most important key axis in the human body. At the very center of this is what we can refer to as the golden thread. It literally has a golden emanation, and it's what's in the exact center line, midline of the body from crown to perineum, and moving above and below. around that infinitesimal golden thread, there is then the amount of this column of energy around it that has been activated by the person's level of spiritual development. Then there's a further form around it where the column is larger, that's roughly the form of the head itself. And then there's a larger form around that that becomes an entirely large column that surrounds the person's entire body, and is sometimes referred to as the pillar of light. But what's always in the epicenter is the golden thread in the form, what's in the exact center and is literally in the midline of the human body. That's one example of the many types of geometry of spirit that the human being is formed around and that is worked with consciously in spiritual initiation to fully activate, to develop higher capacities and powers.